What's going on, guys? It's Paul from Boosted Films coming at you with another how-to tutorial video. Today we're actually looking at installing these white line roll center kit ball joints into our lower control arms from my EVO 8. So while I was dropping the transmission to install my clutch, I thought it would be a great time to kind of do this job as well, since I was getting a lot of stuff out of the way. So just a forewarning before you watch this video that there is a lot of stuff that I removed that you shouldn't have to remove if all you're doing is dropping this lower control arm to put in your ball joint. So I just kind of want to mention that ahead of time. I also want to mention you will need to use a press of some sort to get these out. They also make ball joint removal tools that you can buy or rent from an auto parts store. So you could do that as well if you want to. And also don't forget there's a little C-clip type clip on here. So before you try to press them out or do anything else, you need to remove that clip, and it can be kind of hidden on the OEM ones where this protective cover goes over. So just some things I wanted to point out kind of before I got started into this video. And there's going to be more videos to come. I'm going to try to break down a lot of parts from here if I can. I'm going to do different videos. Also, I installed these new bushings, the rear bushings for the control arm as well. So I'm going to do stuff with that. I got the entire white line roll center kit, so I'm actually installing some outer tie rod ends with that too. So videos like that, depending on when you're watching this, should be up on my YouTube channel. One other thing I was going to mention, but I didn't remember to in the voiceover I did for the how-to is there is a notch kind of taken out of here that you should be able to see a little bit. And you just want to be careful of that when you go to reinstall these for the bolt, and that's where your kind of bolt that bolts in to hold this in place goes through. So you're going to want to pay attention to that when you do reinstall these arms, and maybe I'll do a whole nother video later eventually actually covering this entire install process. But for now, it's just basically removing this control arm and taking out this old ball joint and putting in a new one. So here's the how-to video for that. So the first thing we're going to do here is break loose the lug nuts holding on the wheels while the car is on the ground. If you have an impact wrench, you could put the car up in the air first and then break them loose. Then we're going to jack up the car and put it on jack stands. And once that wheel is removed, you should be able to access the bolt holding in the lower ball joint. There's a nut on one end of the bolt. You should be able to take that nut off and then pull the bolt out. So now you'll see a lot of stuff removed. I had to remove a lot of stuff to drop the transmission. So that's why so much is out of the way, but you should not have to remove your strut or your brake calipers or your brake rotors. I took all this stuff out, the CV shaft, everything like that I took out to get to the transmission. But the good news is that makes it easier for you to see the whole control arm assembly here. So you're going to have a bit more stuff in your way if all you're doing is trying to change your ball joints. And there are two main bolts that hold the lower control arm in place, and they are going to be very tight. So you will want an impact wrench or a long breaker bar to get those bolts loose. You can also spray them with a little bit of PB Blaster or WD-40 or something like that ahead of time if you think of it, to let that soak in a little bit. And as you can see, there is the front bolt holding the front part of the lower control arm in, and that one kind of is going in parallel to the ground. And then there is the other bolt in the back near the rear lower control arm bushing of this front control arm, and then that bolt is kind of going perpendicular to the ground. And you're going to have to remove your sway bar link at one point to take this control arm out. And you can do that before you remove these other two bolts holding the control arm in place if you'd like as well. And it might take a little bit to wiggle that lower control arm out of place. I believe actually on the passenger side of my EVO, I kind of had to pry down a little bit on the piece that it kind of pushes into because it was pinched in there a little bit to get that loose. So once you have the lower control arm out of the car, you can start working on removing that ball joint. So the first thing we're going to do is take off the boot that kind of covers this lower ball joint. And once we remove that boot, you're going to see that there is a C-clip in place that's going to have to get removed as well. So I will advise using or buying a snap ring plier kit for this job. It will make things go a lot easier. So you're going to want to use a snap ring pliers to kind of help remove that C-clip that comes with these OEM ball joints. And when we install our white line ball joints later on, we're going to use a snap ring pliers there as well. So removing the snap ring can be a bit tricky, but as you can see here, we use the pliers to spread the snap ring a bit and then got a screwdriver underneath it to work it around to get it free. So these ball joints will need to be pressed out, and then you'll have to press the new ones back in. So you have a couple options here. You can find a shop that has a press. If you have your own press, obviously you could use that. Otherwise, you can rent a tool from your local auto parts store, and that ball joint install remover tool could be used as well. As you can see here, we had a press available to use. So basically the goal here is to find something big enough underneath to put through that will still hold that lower control arm in place and also allow that ball joint to be pushed through. And then you'll need something to push it through from the top that's small enough to fit through the hole, obviously, that you're pushing through, but yet big enough, to push evenly onto that ball joint. Next, I'm just showing how these white line ball joints look when they came to me. And basically to press them in, we're going to want to remove that protective boot cover, basically, that holds the grease in. We're going to get that out of the way so we don't damage that at all when we press this new ball joint in place. So now it's a very similar procedure to press this in, but basically what we ended up doing here is putting the ball joint down on a flat piece of metal and then kind of pressing the lower control arm onto the ball joint itself. This isn't the only way to do this, but this is just the way we managed to press in this ball joint. And you're going to want to make sure you press that ball joint in all the way. Otherwise, you're going to have a very hard time getting that new snap ring in place if that ball joint's not pressed through as far as it should be. This is something that you should kind of be able to feel out. You should be able to feel when that kind of bottoms out a little bit when you're pressing it down with the press. Otherwise, if you're just taking this to a shop somewhere that has a press and having them do it for you, hopefully that person operating that press has plenty of experience doing such a thing and would be able to just do this for you. So now you can see that we have the two lower ball joints pressed into our lower control arms. And what we're going to do here is use the snap ring pliers again to spread those snap rings and then push them into place. These snap rings, and it might depend on the quality of the snap ring pliers you have, but I noticed when you kind of spread them apart, they would try to twist a bit, so they definitely won't really stay flat. So that's just something I ran into, and basically to help solve that, what I ended up doing was using a screwdriver to kind of hold down one end and pry down one end of the snap ring while I kind of spread it apart, and then just worked my way around to get that snap ring down and in place. So this did take a couple attempts to get these snap rings in place. I did end up finding out that the snap ring pliers that are kind of bent at a 90-degree angle worked a little easier for me to end up getting these snap rings on and in place. Once those snap rings are in place, you should be able to put your protective boot cover back on, basically. And then once you kind of push that down and around and in place, you'll want to use a screwdriver and or a little pliers, and you should be able to put that kind of retainer metal clip back in place. And as you'll see here, I kind of started with one end of this and worked my way around to kind of bring it down back into place where it should be. So just take your time again and be sure not to damage that boot. You don't want to puncture it or put a hole in it or anything, so the grease would be able to come out. You want that grease obviously to stay in your ball joint area there where it should be. And that's about it. Then you should be able to reinstall your lower control arms, obviously reverse order of how you took them out. I do have other videos. If they're not out yet, they will be soon. I will have videos on installing the outer tie rod ends as well as the kind of bushings for these lower control arms as well. So check out my YouTube channel for the rest of that. Obviously, you can give it a subscribe to be notified about new videos. Otherwise, as always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks for watching.